They thought only one person would show up at the funeral home. He died, broke, had no house, no inheritance. But when the doors opened, 200 people walked in. When they learned the old man's identity, everyone was left in shock. Nobody knew Harold Mitchell. At 84 years old, he lived alone at Sunset Manor nursing home. For 15 years, he never had a single visitor. He celebrated birthdays alone, spent holidays alone. The nurses felt sorry for him. A man without family, without children, cut off from friends. His room was small, his belongings few, his pockets empty. His Social Security check barely covered the nursing home expenses. But Harold had one photograph in his room. Old, faded, with a cracked frame. Nobody knew what it was, and Harold never explained. Not until that cold December morning when he took his last breath on life support. Welcome to the Last Stand channel. Have you ever had a relative in a nursing home? Share your experiences in the comments. Harold Mitchell was the quietest resident at Sunset Manor nursing home. He lived alone in room 247. An 84-year-old man, thin, with white hair. Every morning at 7 a.m., he'd wake up and look out the window at the garden. He'd eat his breakfast in silence, never talking to anyone. While other elderly residents watched TV and chatted together, Harold sat alone in the corner chair. Nurse Linda felt sorry for him. "Harold, why don't you chat with the others?" she'd ask. Harold would shake his head but never answer. He had lived at Sunset Manor for 15 years. In those 15 years, he never had a visitor, never received a phone call, never got a letter. Even on birthdays, nobody came. Harold's room had very few belongings. A bed, a closet, a small table. But on the table sat a photograph. Old, faded, with a cracked frame. The photo showed a white ship. There were people on it, but the photo was so old the details couldn't be made out. Every night before bed, Harold would pick up this photo and stare at it for a long time. When nurses asked, "What is this, Harold?" he never answered. He'd just put the photo back in place and retreat into silence. He had one strange habit. Every evening, he'd listen to the weather reports. Not just land weather, but marine forecasts, wave heights, wind speeds, storm warnings. When asked why, he'd say, "Old habit." Harold's loneliness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual loneliness. There was deep sadness in his eyes, like a man who had experienced great losses, who had seen too much. During holidays, other elderly residents waited for family visits. Harold would stay in his room looking out the window. Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter, always alone. The nurses felt sorry for him. "Doesn't Harold have any family?" They'd discuss among themselves. "So sad, nobody cares about him." But Harold never showed his sadness. He was always polite, said thank you, tried not to be a burden to anyone. "At this age, I don't want to be dependent on anyone," he'd say. At the end of November, Harold's health began to deteriorate. But this wasn't just physical decline, he was emotionally exhausted too. Nights were the hardest times. Harold couldn't sleep. He had coughing fits. But the most painful part was the moments he spent alone in the darkness. During night shifts, Nurse Linda would hear quiet sobbing sounds from Harold's room. When she'd check on him, Harold would be looking at that old photograph. "Harold, can't you sleep?" Linda asked one night. Harold turned his head. His eyes showed deep fatigue, but he didn't complain. "Good night, Linda. Thank you." As Linda left his room, she heard Harold crying quietly. But Harold never made a sound of complaint. In the mornings, Harold would look out his window at the garden. He'd watch other elderly residents receive family visits, silently, without comment. On the night of December 14th, Harold's condition became critical. He was having great difficulty breathing. He was moved to life support. Harold was conscious but couldn't speak. His eyes were open, watching his surroundings. Linda held his hand. "Harold, you're not alone. I'm here with you," Linda said. Harold looked at Linda. Tears streamed from his eyes. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. Linda tried to read Harold's lips. "What are you trying to say?" Harold whispered with difficulty. "Thank you." "For what, Harold?" "For being kind to me." Linda began to cry. "You're a very special person, Harold." Harold smiled quietly. He never complained, never questioned. He only showed gratitude. On the morning of December 15th, at 6:00 a.m., Harold's condition worsened further. His pulse was dropping. Linda wouldn't leave Harold's side. "Harold, stay with me." Harold opened his eyes. He looked at Linda. "Linda, I have one last request." "Yes, Harold, whatever you want." "After I die, that photograph, bury it, with me." "Which photograph?" "The ship photo, on the table. Those were my best days." Linda was crying. "Okay, Harold, I promise." Harold was breathing with difficulty. "Linda, you're like an angel." "Harold, I was lucky to know you." Harold never complained about his own condition. Until his final moment, he thought of others. At 6:30 a.m., Harold took his last breath. His final words were, "It was a beautiful life." Linda held Harold's hand, crying. Harold had died alone, but peacefully, without complaints. Nurse Linda was crying. "No person should be this alone," she said. In 84 years of life, he had nobody. The nursing home director, John Davidson, started the procedures. They collected Harold's personal belongings. There was very little. A few old clothes, that mysterious photograph, and a small box. When they opened the box, there were old documents inside, but they couldn't understand what they were. They looked like official papers. John Davidson called the funeral home. "A resident from our nursing home has passed away. He has no family. We want to arrange a funeral." Robert Foster, the funeral home owner, learned the situation. "Very sad. We sometimes encounter such cases. We'll arrange a simple ceremony." "How many people do you expect?" Robert asked. "Just a few of us will come. Maybe 4, 5 people. He was a very lonely man." Robert reserved a small chapel. "Should we put a newspaper notice? Maybe someone who knew him will show up." "Sure, let's try, but there's not much hope." The next day, a small notice appeared in the local newspaper. Harold Mitchell, age 84, passed away at Sunset Manor nursing home. Funeral service will be held Friday, December 18th at 2:00 p.m. at Foster Funeral Home. The notice was very brief. There was no information about Harold's life, because nobody knew. John Davidson was hopeless. Nobody will even read this notice. Poor Harold, alone forever. Nurse Linda was also sad. "He was here for 15 years. Nobody ever came. Nobody will come to his funeral either." That day, preparations were made. Small chapel, a few flowers, simple ceremony, for 4 or 5 people. On Friday morning, December 18th, Robert Foster prepared the funeral home. He placed Harold's photograph on a small table, that old, faded photograph. Flowers were arranged. "How many people will come?" he asked his wife. They said 4 or 5 people, very few. Robert was sad. He had run the funeral home for 40 years. Seeing lonely people's funerals was always heartbreaking. At 1:30 p.m., 4 people came from Sunset Manor. John Davidson, Nurse Linda, and 2 employees. They were all sad. "I guess nobody else will come," said John. "Let's begin." At 1:45 p.m., there was a knock on the door. When Robert Foster opened it, he was shocked. Coast Guard officers in uniform were standing at the door. A commander was at their head. "Is Harold Mitchell's funeral here?" the commander asked. "Yes, but who are you?" "I'm Commander Patricia Hayes, Coast Guard District 1. We're Harold's former colleagues." As Robert let them in, he was amazed. The Coast Guard had come officially. 5 minutes later, the door knocked again. This time, there was a group of 20 Coast Guard members. Retired and active personnel mixed. Then, the Coast Guard Honor Guard came, with flag and trumpet. Then the Coast Guard band came. Robert Foster was going crazy. "We weren't expecting this many." 5 minutes later, the door knocked again. This time, an elderly couple was standing there. The man had flowers in his hand. "Is Harold Mitchell's funeral here?" he asked. "Yes, but who are you?" "I'm William Parker. This is my wife Margaret. We knew Harold." Then a family came. Mother, father, 2 adult children. Then another couple. Then more people. Until 2:00 p.m., people kept coming. Robert Foster was amazed. The small chapel was full. People were standing. "We weren't expecting this many," he told John Davidson. "Did you know Harold was known by this many people?" "No, I had no idea. He never had visitors for 15 years. People kept coming. Young, old, middle-aged. People of different ages, different appearances. Robert Foster had to quickly open the large hall, but that wasn't enough either. People began waiting in the corridors. At 2:30 p.m., Robert decided to count. There were nearly 200 people. When the ceremony began, Robert Foster asked, "How did so many people know Harold Mitchell? Is anyone from his family among us?" Commander Hayes stood up and made an official announcement. Harold Mitchell served honorably in the U.S. Coast Guard for 30 years. He rose to the rank of Petty Officer First Class. Harold's record is flawless. He participated in 347 rescue operations and saved 182 lives. John Davidson was shocked. Coast Guard? Harold never mentioned it. Elderly William Parker stood up. He had that old photograph in his hand. "The photograph from Harold's room. We took this photograph from Harold's belongings," said John Davidson. "We didn't know what it was." William looked at the photograph. Tears appeared in his eyes. "This is the Coast Guard ship USCGC Northwind, taken in 1965. I was on this ship too." The hall fell silent. Everyone listened with curiosity. Harold Mitchell served 30 years in the U.S. Coast Guard, Petty Officer First Class. He specialized in rescue operations. The Coast Guard Honor Guard approached Harold's casket. They draped the American flag over the casket. The trumpeter played taps. All Coast Guard personnel saluted. A middle-aged man stood up. "I'm James Wilson. Harold rescued me in 1978. Fishing boats sank. I waited 6 hours in icy water. Harold and his team found me." Another woman stood up. "I'm Sarah Davis. Harold rescued me in 1982. I had a heart attack on a cruise ship. Harold's team performed the medical evacuation." A family stood up. "Harold rescued our father. His sailboat capsized in 1975. People began standing up one by one and telling their stories. 1974 winter storm. Harold rescued 8 people in 12 hours. 1979 cruise ship breakdown. Harold safely brought 200 passengers to shore. In 1983, Harold rescued me before his last mission. I was caught in a storm while fishing." The same name came up in every story. Harold Mitchell. Each time, the man who saved their lives. James Wilson spoke through tears. "Harold saved me from death. I got married, had 3 children, have 5 grandchildren, all because of Harold." Sarah Davis wiped her eyes. "Without Harold, my children would have grown up motherless." Nurse Linda was confused. "But why didn't anyone visit Harold for 15 years? William Parker explained. "After Harold retired in 1985, he disappeared. He changed his address, changed his phone number. We were looking for him but couldn't find him." "Why?" asked John Davidson. William's face darkened. In 1984, on his last mission, he couldn't save a man, a young fisherman, Michael Torres. He was 22, newly married, his wife was pregnant. The hall fell silent. "Harold did everything. We searched for 8 hours. Harold dove into the icy water 6 times, but we couldn't find Michael." William stopped, took a breath. Michael's body washed ashore 3 days later. His family blamed Harold. "You should have saved him," they screamed. "This is your job. How could you fail?" The media got involved. Newspapers wrote, "Coast Guard failed. Who's responsible for young fisherman's death?" James Wilson added through tears. They opened an investigation into Harold. His 30-year career was questioned. "Did you follow procedures correctly?" they asked. William Parker continued. "Even though the Coast Guard cleared Harold, the press and family pressure was enormous. His superiors told Harold, 'Retire early. This incident won't go away.'" Harold was shocked. He had saved 182 lives over 30 years. But because he couldn't save one person, his entire career was ruined. Sarah Davis was crying. "Harold told me, 'William, I served for 30 years. Nobody ever thanked me. But when I failed once, everyone blamed me.' Michael Torres' family sued Harold. They filed a negligence lawsuit. Harold won but suffered emotional collapse. On the day he retired, Harold was crying. "I lived to save people. Now they see me as a killer," he said. William's eyes were filled with tears. That's why he disappeared. With disappointment, with shame. He felt worthless. William Parker read from Harold's file. Harold Mitchell participated in 347 rescue operations during his 30-year career. He officially saved 182 lives. But the real number is much higher. He risked his own life many times. In 1976, he stayed in icy seas for 2 hours to save a young sailor. He got hypothermia, but saved the man. In 1981, he entered a burning ship 3 times to save a family. 15% of his body was burned, but he saved 4 people. In 1983, a helicopter crashed in a storm. Harold jumped into the water, saved the pilot. He himself stayed in icy water for 6 hours. Every story revealed Harold's sacrifice. Commander Hayes held a file in her hand. "We are posthumously awarding Harold Mitchell the Coast Guard Achievement Medal for his 30 years of excellent service." Additionally, Harold is being added to the Coast Guard's highest honor list in his name. The Coast Guard officer placed the medal on the casket. Harold Mitchell, this is your final duty call. Well done, Coastie. Rest in peace. All Coast Guard personnel shouted together, "Semper Paratus." The hall echoed. Everyone was crying. At the end of the ceremony, William Parker made a final statement. Harold Mitchell lived 84 years. He dedicated 30 years to saving other people's lives. He never married, had no children, but the 200 people who came here today are his family. Each of us is alive because of Harold. Our children, our grandchildren exist because of Harold. Harold died broke, had no house, no inheritance. But his real legacy is here. 200 families, hundreds of children, thousands of grandchildren. All Harold's legacy. The hall was standing and applauding. Everyone was crying. James Wilson shouted, "Coast Guard hero Harold Mitchell." Semper Paratus. The entire hall repeated together, Semper Paratus. Always ready. After the funeral ceremony ended, nobody wanted to leave. People continued sharing stories about Harold. William Parker approached the casket. He draped an old Coast Guard flag over the casket. "Harold, you can rest now. You've completed your mission." Sarah Davis left flowers. "Thank you, Harold. I owe you my life." James Wilson left his medal on the casket. "This is mine, but it's really your right." Everyone came one by one and left something. Flowers, letters, photos, medals. Harold's casket was filled with gifts. After the funeral, Commander Hayes made a major announcement. "As the Coast Guard, we will keep Harold's memory alive. We're naming the new Coast Guard station in New Bedford Harold Mitchell Station. Additionally, Harold's story will be told in all Coast Guard training programs." James Wilson added, "We're also establishing the Harold Mitchell Foundation. We'll help lonely veterans." The 200 people united. They collected money, started projects. 6 months later, a magnificent monument was erected in Harold's memory. Harold Mitchell Memorial Park, U.S. Coast Guard Hero 1940, 2024, Semper Paratus, always ready. 30 years of service, 347 operations, saved 182 lives. I was just doing my job, Harold Mitchell. At the monument's opening ceremony, there were 500 people. The Coast Guard band played. Planes flew overhead. They saluted Harold. Harold's story made a big impact in the media. It came out with the headline, "The man who saved 182 lives but died alone." Thousands of letters came to Sunset Manor. People began visiting lonely, elderly people. Nurse Linda turned Harold's room into a museum. That old photograph and Harold's belongings were displayed. Every year on Harold's death anniversary, 200 people come to honor his memory. If you enjoy such powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We share these valuable stories with you every day. Harold Mitchell lived 84 years. He spent 15 years in loneliness. But when he died, 200 people came to his funeral. Because Harold taught us, real wealth is not money, but the lives you save. Real legacy is not house and property, but the souls you touch. And Harold's legacy still lives. 200 families, hundreds of children, thousands of grandchildren. Semper Paratus, always ready. This wasn't just a motto. It was Harold Mitchell's way of life.